The first human to see a god die was not a soldier or a scientist. He was a janitor named Mike, who worked the night shift at the Deep Space Communications Array in Nevada. The alien signal came through at 3:47 a.m. on a Tuesday, cutting through, static like a knife through paper. Mike dropped his coffee mug and watched it shatter across the floor as voices filled the empty control room. They spoke in perfect English, though their words carried undertones that made his teeth ache. Primitive, species of Sol 3. You will present yourselves before the Galactic Dominion within one rotation of your planet. Failure to comply will result in classification as livestock. The message repeated 17 times before falling silent. Mike stared at the radio equipment for a full minute, then picked up the red phone that connected directly to the Pentagon. 3 hours later, every government on Earth knew that humanity was no longer alone. The aliens arrived exactly 24 hours after their message. Their ships looked like someone had grown cathedrals from living bone, all twisted spires and organic curves that hurt to look at directly. They settled into orbit around Earth without making a sound, casting shadows over entire continents. David Torres had been a diplomat for 15 years, but nothing in his training prepared him for walking aboard an alien vessel. The corridors breathed. The walls pulsed with veins of luminescent fluid. Everything smelled like copper and ozone, with an underlying sweetness that reminded him of rotting flowers. His escort was a creature that stood 9 feet tall on 4 legs ending in talons. Its upper body was humanoid, covered in chitinous plates that shifted from black to deep purple in the artificial light. When it spoke, its voice came from somewhere deep in its throat like rocks grinding together. I am Vorthak, High Priest of the Crithian hegemony. You will address me as Lord Vorthak. David had been instructed to be diplomatic, but something about the creature's tone made his jaw clench. I'm David Torres, representing the United Nations of Earth. We received your message. Message? Vorthak's mandibles clicked in what might have been amusement. That was not a message, human. That was a summons. The meeting chamber was vast, with a ceiling that disappeared into darkness. 12 different species sat in a circle around the center of the room, each more alien than the last. Some floated in tanks of glowing liquid. Others appeared to be made of living crystal or metal. One looked like a small star contained in a web of silver wires. All of them were staring at David. Vorthak gestured for David to stand in the center of the circle. Members of the Dominion Council, I present the representative of species designation, Sol 3 human. Current classification, Tier 0, pre-divine. A ripple of what David could only interpret as laughter moved through the assembled aliens. A creature that looked like it was carved from blue ice leaned forward. Pre-divine? They have no gods at all? None that we can detect, Vorthak replied. No psychic emanations, no divine constructs, no sacrificial temples. They appear to worship abstract concepts and long-dead individuals of their own species. Fascinating, whispered a being that seemed to be made of shifting geometric patterns. How do they channel power without divine patrons? They burn fossil fuels and split atoms, Vorthak said, his tone making it clear how primitive he found this. Crude chemical reactions and basic nuclear processes. The ice creature made a sound like wind through a cavern. How quaint. And you say they actually traveled between star systems using these methods? Barely, Vorthak admitted. Their fastest vessels would take centuries to reach the nearest inhabited world. They clearly require divine intervention to join galactic civilization. David listened to them discuss humanity, like specimens in a laboratory. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, but he forced himself to remain calm. Earth's entire population depended on this meeting going well. What do you propose? Asked a voice that seemed to come from everywhere at once. David couldn't identify which alien had spoken. Vorthak spread his 4 arms wide. Standard protocol for pre-divine species. We offer them the chance to choose divine patrons from among our gods. If they prove worthy of divine attention, they may be elevated to Tier 1 status and granted basic membership in the Dominion. And if they prove unworthy, the voice belonged to a creature that looked like a living plant, all vines and thorns and flower petals the color of dried blood. Then they retain their current classification as pre-sentient life forms, suitable for labor and resource extraction. David's diplomatic training finally kicked in. "Excuse me, but Earth sent me here to establish peaceful relations between our species. We're not looking for gods or divine intervention. We'd like to discuss trade agreements and cultural exchange." The audio silence that followed was deafening. Then the aliens began making sounds that David realized were laughter. Not friendly laughter, but the kind reserved for children who said something amusing in their ignorance. Vorthak wiped moisture from his compound eyes. "Human, you misunderstand your situation entirely. This is not a negotiation between equals. You have been summoned before the Dominion to determine your fate. Your species will be classified based on your divine worthiness. There is no alternative." "What if we refuse?" David asked, though he suspected he wouldn't like the answer. The laughter stopped. Vorthak's expression became predatory. "Would you like a demonstration of what refusal means?" Before David could respond, the chamber filled with presence. Something vast and hungry pressed against the edges of his consciousness, making his vision blur and his ears ring. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in seconds. Reality seemed to bend as something impossible pushed through the walls of the ship. It was the size of a mountain, covered in writhing tentacles that ended in eyes the size of city blocks. Each eye blinked independently, and when they focused on David, he felt his mind trying to shut down to protect itself. "Behold Nethys, the devourer of worlds," Vorthak said, his voice filled with religious fervor. "First among the Crethean gods, consumer of 1,000 species." The entity spoke without words, its voice echoing directly inside David's skull. Such a small mind, so limited. What worship could you possibly offer? David fell to his knees, blood trickling from his nose. Around the chamber, the other aliens were bowing, offering prayers and tribute to the massive god. Some threw precious metals and gems toward the creature. Others offered drops of their own blood. Nethys accepted the tribute, absorbing it directly into its flesh. With each offering, the god seemed to grow larger and more solid. "This is the power that guides the Dominion," Vorthak explained. "This is what separates civilized species from animals like yourselves. Divine patronage. Gods who grant us technology, knowledge, and power beyond your understanding." The god withdrew as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving David gasping on the floor. His hands were shaking, and he could taste copper in his mouth. Vorthak helped him to his feet with mocking gentleness. "You have one rotation of your world to find gods worthy of the Dominion's attention. Return here with divine patrons, or your species will be reclassified as livestock." The journey back to Earth passed in a blur. David's report to the United Nations was met with disbelief, then panic, then desperate determination. Humanity had 1 year to find gods or face slavery to aliens who thought of them as cattle. As David finished his report, he couldn't stop thinking about the contempt in Vorthak's voice. The alien had called them weak because they had no gods. Maybe he was right. Maybe humanity really was nothing compared to beings who could summon mountain-sized entities from other dimensions. But something deep in David's gut rebelled against that thought. Humanity had survived ice ages and plagues, world wars, and natural disasters. They had split the atom and walked on other worlds without any gods helping them. Perhaps that made them weak in the aliens' eyes, or perhaps it made them something else entirely, something that didn't need gods to be dangerous. Rebecca Hayes had been studying space jellyfish when the world ended. Not literally ended, but close enough. The massive translucent creatures drifted through the void near Jupiter's moons, feeding on solar radiation and cosmic particles. They were beautiful, harmless, and completely useless for defending Earth against alien gods. 3 months into humanity's 1-year deadline, Rebecca found herself leading Project Prometheus from a hastily converted military base in Colorado. The name was chosen carefully. Prometheus had stolen fire from the gods and given it to humanity. Now humanity needed to steal gods themselves. "Status report," Rebecca said as she entered the main operations center. Banks of computers lined the walls displaying star charts and signal intercepts from across known space. 200 of Earth's best scientists worked around the clock, following every lead that might point toward divine beings. Tom Bradley, her second-in-command, looked up from a stack of reports. His hair had gone completely gray in the past 3 months. Everyone's had. We've got 17 possible contacts in the past week. 14 turned out to be natural phenomena. 2 were alien garbage dumps. The last one was promising until we realized it was just a really large asteroid with unusual mineral deposits. Rebecca nodded grimly. They had sent probe ships to investigate hundreds of potential god sightings, radio signals that might indicate divine communication, energy readings that suggested supernatural activity, ancient ruins that could house sleeping deities. Every lead had ended in disappointment. "What about the deep space reconnaissance mission?" she asked. Tom pointed to a display showing the outer rim of the galaxy. The Anderson expedition found something interesting near the Veil Nebula. Wreckage of an alien civilization, but the destruction patterns are unlike anything we've seen. Whatever killed them was thorough. Rebecca studied the images streaming back from the probe ship. Entire planets had been stripped down to their cores. Star systems showed signs of having their energy completely drained. It looked like something had eaten entire solar systems. "How old?" she asked. "Carbon dating suggests about 3,000 years. But here's the strange part. We're detecting similar destruction patterns in 17 other star systems, all in a rough line heading toward Dominion space." Rebecca felt a chill that had nothing to do with the underground facility's air conditioning. Something was moving through space, consuming entire civilizations? Or someone. The destruction patterns suggest intelligence behind the attacks. Before Rebecca could respond, an alarm began blaring throughout the facility. The main display screen flickered and showed an incoming priority transmission from the Deep Space Relay Network. The image that appeared made everyone in the room stop working. A creature unlike anything in Earth's databases floated against a background of stars. It was vaguely humanoid but ancient beyond measure, its skin like weathered stone, its eyes pools of liquid silver. When it spoke, its voice carried harmonics that made the speakers crack. "Species of Sol 3. I am called the Chronicler. I have been monitoring your transmissions. You seek gods to appease the Dominion." Rebecca stepped forward, her heart pounding. "That's correct. Can you help us?" The Chronicler's expression was unreadable. "I can do something far more valuable. I can warn you. The beings the Dominion calls gods are not divine. They are parasites from beyond your reality, entities that feed on the life force and worship of entire species." "We've seen their power," Rebecca said. "One of them nearly killed our representative just by manifesting." "Power, yes, but not divinity. They are predators, nothing more. My people learned this truth 3 millennia too late." The Chronicler gestured, and the display filled with images of a magnificent civilization, crystalline cities that reached into the clouds, ships that moved between stars like silverfish through water, billions of beings that looked similar to the Chronicler, living in harmony across hundreds of worlds. We served the god Axiom for 2,000 years. We built temples in its honor, offered tribute, sent our greatest minds to commune with its divine wisdom. Axiom grew stronger with each generation that worshipped it. The images changed, showing the same worlds consumed by geometric patterns of destruction. Cities collapsed into perfect mathematical shapes. Entire populations simply vanished, leaving behind only crystalline formations. In the end, Axiom devoured us all. Not our bodies, but our souls, our life essence. Everything that made us who we were became food for the entity we had worshipped as a god. Rebecca stared at the images in horror. "How did you survive?" "I was off-world when Axiom fed for the final time. I and a few thousand others scattered across space. We have spent 3,000 years running, hiding, trying to warn other species about the truth of the Dominion's gods. But the other species in the Dominion worship these things willingly," Tom said. "They seem to benefit from divine patronage." The Chronicler's laugh was bitter. "They benefit temporarily. The gods grant technology and power to keep their worshippers productive, like farmers fattening cattle. But every species that serves the Dominion eventually faces the final feeding. Some last centuries. Others are consumed within decades. The gods' hunger is infinite. Rebecca felt her world shifting around her. Are you saying the Dominion knows their gods are parasites? The leadership knows. They must. But they believe they can avoid their species' eventual consumption by offering other races as tribute. Each new species that joins the Dominion provides fresh feeding for the gods, delaying the inevitable. The implications hit Rebecca like a physical blow. Humanity wasn't being offered membership in a galactic civilization. They were being evaluated as potential livestock. What can we do? She asked. If these entities are as powerful as they appear, how can anyone resist them? The chronicler was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice carried something that might have been hope. There are stories, legends among the survivors of consumed worlds. They speak of 3 entities that exist at the edges of known space. Beings powerful enough that even the Dominion's gods avoid their territories. Other gods? Rebecca asked. No. Something else entirely. Entities that exist outside the normal rules of reality. They are old beyond measure and follow no laws that mortals can understand. Whether they could help you, I cannot say, but they are the only beings in the galaxy that the Dominion fears. The chronicler provided coordinates for 3 locations at the very rim of the galaxy. Places where space itself seemed to behave strangely, where ships disappeared and strange signals originated. I will warn you once more, the chronicler said before ending the transmission. These entities are not gods to be worshipped. They are forces of nature given consciousness. Approaching them may save your species, or it may doom you in ways worse than the Dominion ever could. Rebecca stared at the coordinates on her screen. 3 impossible destinations at the edge of known space. 3 potential allies that might be more dangerous than the enemies humanity already faced. Tom, prepare 3 expedition fleets. Fast ships with minimal crews. We're going to the edge of everything. Rebecca, the transmission mentioned these things might be worse than the Dominion gods. Rebecca thought about David Torres's report, about the contempt in the alien voices as they discussed humanity's fate, about entire civilizations consumed by entities they had worshipped as divine. Tom, we've spent 3 months looking for gods to protect us. Maybe it's time we stopped looking for protectors and started looking for weapons. The first expedition launched 2 weeks later, heading for a region of space where 3 star systems had simply vanished from existence. The second fleet aimed for coordinates where radio telescopes detected signals that existed in 17 dimensions simultaneously. The third ship traveled toward a nebula that appeared to be alive, pulsing with its own heartbeat. Rebecca watched the ships disappear into the darkness beyond Earth's solar system. She had no idea what they would find out there. Ancient entities that might help humanity, or forces that would destroy them more thoroughly than the Dominion ever could. But for the first time since the aliens had arrived, Rebecca felt something besides despair. Humanity was done begging for divine protection. Now they were hunting for something far more dangerous. They were looking for equals. The thing about gods, Maria Santos discovered, was that they bled just like everything else. She was crouched in the ruins of what used to be downtown Los Angeles when the revelation hit her. The Dominion fleet had arrived exactly 1 year after. Their ultimatum, their bone cathedral ship settling into Earth's atmosphere like disease settling into healthy tissue. The aliens had expected surrender, begging, maybe some futile resistance from primitive weapons. Instead, they got Maria Santos with a homemade rocket launcher, hiding behind the wreckage of a Starbucks, taking aim at something that claimed to be divine. The god hovering above Wilshire Boulevard looked like a living star wrapped in silver wire. It called itself Pyrrhion, the flame eternal, and it had been busy turning city blocks into glass with beams of pure plasma. According to the Dominion's broadcasts, Pyrrhion was a minor deity, barely worth mentioning compared to the major gods. Maria didn't care about the hierarchy. She just knew it had killed her little brother when it melted the elementary school. Thuco. Rocket hit Pyrrhion's center mass and exploded in a shower of white phosphorus and depleted uranium. The result was not what anyone expected. Instead of the blast being absorbed or deflected by divine energy, the god staggered in midair and let out a sound like a blast furnace screaming. Golden liquid began raining down on the ruined city. Divine blood, apparently, looked a lot like molten metal. "Well, I'll be damned," Maria muttered, loading another rocket. "You can hurt them." The revelation spread across Earth's defense networks within hours. From London to Tokyo, from Sydney to New York, the message went out. Human weapons could damage the gods, not energy weapons or advanced technology, but old-fashioned kinetic force and chemical explosives. Rebecca Hayes coordinated the global response from a bunker deep beneath the Rocky Mountains. Her expedition fleets had returned with disturbing news. The three entities they had found at the edge of space were indeed powerful beyond measure, but they had refused to help humanity. Not out of malice, but out of something like pity. "You seek gods because you believe you need them," the entity called Unity had explained through quantum communications that hurt to listen to. "But we have observed your species across multiple timelines. You do not kneel easily. Perhaps that is why you interest us." "Can you help us fight the Dominion?" Rebecca had asked. "We could unmake the Dominion with a thought," Unity replied. "But that would teach you nothing, and you have something to learn from this experience." Now watching her screens as human forces engaged divine entities across the planet, Rebecca was beginning to understand what unity meant. The gods were powerful, but their power followed rules. They absorbed energy attacks, deflected psychic assaults, and remained unharmed by exotic matter weapons. But they had never encountered a species that still used gunpowder and uranium, kinetic energy and chemical reactions. The Dominion's gods were prepared for everything except the primitive. In Moscow, a tank battalion discovered that armor-piercing shells could penetrate divine flesh. The god they killed looked like a walking mountain of crystal and ice. Its death scream shattered windows for 50 miles in every direction. In Beijing, Air Force pilots learned that heat-seeking missiles worked just fine on entities made of living plasma. The god fell into the Yangtze River and turned a mile of water to steam, but it stayed dead. The pattern repeated across every battlefield. Humanity's crude weapons, dismissed by the aliens as barely functional, were the one thing the gods couldn't defend against, but the cost was devastating. For every god humanity killed, they lost millions of people. Entire cities vanished under divine wrath. The gods might be vulnerable to primitive weapons, but they were still gods. Tommy Wright was 17 years old when he made history by eating one. The god he killed was small by divine standards, only about the size of a house. It looked like a jellyfish made of living shadow, floating through the ruins of Chicago and consuming the life force of anyone it touched. Tommy had been separated from his family when the city fell, living in the subway tunnels with a handful of other survivors. He killed it with a railgun he built from spare parts and a cargo train's electromagnetic brakes. The weapon fired a steel rod at 10,000 meters per second, punching through the god's energy field and tearing its central mass apart. Tommy expected the creature to dissolve or explode or disappear back to whatever dimension it came from. Instead, it just fell to the ground and lay there, bleeding silver fluid onto the broken concrete. He was hungry. Everyone was hungry. The city's food distribution system had collapsed weeks ago, and the survivors were living on whatever they could scavenge. The god's flesh looked solid enough, and Tommy had always been practical about survival. The first bite tasted like copper and electricity. The second bite tasted like music. By the third bite, Tommy Wright was no longer entirely human. The changes started immediately. His vision expanded beyond normal human range, allowing him to see heat signatures and electromagnetic fields. His reflexes accelerated until he could track individual raindrops falling. Most importantly, he began to understand things he had never learned, knowledge flowing into his mind from the consumed divine essence. Word of Tommy's transformation spread through the survivor networks. Other humans began hunting the smaller gods, not to drive them away, but to kill and consume them. The results varied, but the pattern held. Divine flesh was not only edible but transformative. Children showed the greatest adaptability to divine consumption. Adults who ate god flesh often died from the changes, their bodies unable to handle the transformation. But children and teenagers absorbed the divine essence and became something new. 8-year-old Amy Chen ate the remains of a crystalline god and gained the ability to manipulate matter at the molecular level. She could turn concrete into gold, water into steel, air into solid diamond. 12-year-old Marcus Brown consumed part of a temporal entity and began experiencing events before they happened, warning human forces about incoming attacks. The Dominion's response was predictable. They sent their major gods to Earth's surface, entities so powerful that even modified humans couldn't hope to face them. Nethys, the devourer of worlds, manifested above New York City. The same god that had nearly broken David Torres' mind, with its presence now hung in Earth's sky like a living nightmare. Its tentacles, each one the size of a skyscraper, began reaching toward the city. But New York was ready. The plan had been Rebecca's idea, refined by Tommy Wright and a dozen other god-eaters. They couldn't match Nethys in raw power, but they didn't need to. They just needed to ground it. The electromagnetic pulse started in the subway system, generators stolen from hospitals and power plants all firing simultaneously. The pulse disrupted Nethys's energy matrix just long enough for the god to lose its hold on whatever dimension it normally existed in. Nethys fell. The impact crater stretched from Manhattan to Queens. The god's massive form lay broken among the ruins of the city. Its mountain-sized bulk split open by the force of its own landing. What followed was less a battle than a feeding frenzy. Humans emerged from every shelter, every bunker, every hiding place in the city. They came with knives and saws, axes and blowtorches. They came hungry. The feast lasted for days. Thousands of people consumed divine flesh, but it was the children who showed the most dramatic changes. Those who ate from Nethys's central nervous system gained telepathic abilities that spanned continents. Those who consumed its sensory organs could perceive reality across multiple dimensions. Tommy Wright, now nearly 8 feet tall with eyes that glowed with absorbed starlight, ate from the god's core. The knowledge that flooded into his mind was overwhelming. Memories of 1,000 consumed worlds, the locations of every god in the galaxy, the true structure of reality itself. When he could speak again, his voice carried harmonics that made windows crack. "I know where they all are," he said, looking up at the Dominion ship still orbiting Earth. "Every god they worship, every world they've consumed, every species they've enslaved." Maria Santos, her body now crackling with electrical energy from consuming a plasma god, nodded grimly. "Then it's time to hunt." The first human fleet launched a month later. Ships built from salvaged Dominion technology, crewed by children who had consumed divine essence and adults who had somehow survived the transformation. They didn't head for the Dominion capital. They went hunting for gods. The age of humanity begging for divine protection was over. The age of humanity consuming divinity itself had begun. And the gods, for the first time in their existence, learned what it meant to be prey. The hardest part about hunting gods, Alex Kim discovered, was that they never stopped screaming. He floated in the void between Mars and Jupiter, his body no longer requiring a spacesuit after consuming the essence of a stellar deity. Through the modified Dominion bioship's hull, he could hear Axiom crying out as the hunting pack closed in around it. The crystalline god had been fleeing for 3 weeks, jumping between star systems in increasingly desperate attempts to escape its human pursuers. It had consumed the Chronicler's people millennia ago, grown fat on their worship and life force. Now it discovered what the bottom of the food chain felt like. "Target is cornered," Alex reported to his hunting partner Ryan, his twin brother, who floated on the opposite side of their prey. The twins had shared the remains of a hive-mind deity, linking their consciousness in ways that made them nearly unstoppable as a team. All dimensional escape routes blocked. Ryan's response came directly into Alex's mind. No radio transmission needed. Good. I'm getting tired of chasing this thing. Ready to move to capture phase? Around them, 24 other human ships maintained a perfect sphere formation. Each vessel was crewed by children who had consumed divine essence, their bodies and minds transformed beyond normal human limitations. They called themselves the Ascended, though the few unchanged humans who worked with them preferred less flattering terms. Axiom hung in the center of their formation like a living cathedral made of geometric patterns and crystalline growth. It was beautiful in an alien way, its faceted surface reflecting starlight in colors that had no names in human language. It was also terrified, broadcasting psychic distress calls across multiple dimensions. The god's fear tasted like cold metal and broken glass. Alex savored it. "Remember the plan?" came Tommy Wright's voice over the fleet communication system. At 19, Tommy was considered the elder statesman of the Ascended, having been the first human to consume divine flesh. His ship, built around the preserved heart of Nethys, hung at the formation's center like a dark star. "We take it alive if possible. Dead gods are nutritious, but living ones provide more usable essence." Alex felt the familiar hunger stirring in his stomach. 3 months of hunting had taken him across half the galaxy, consuming minor deities and growing stronger with each feeding. But Axiom was different. This was one of the Dominion's major gods, an entity that had devoured entire civilizations. Eating it would be like consuming a condensed star. The capture began with electromagnetic nets, technology reverse-engineered, from Dominion bioships and enhanced with human ingenuity. The nets disrupted Axiom's energy matrix, preventing it from phasing into other dimensions or dissolving into pure thought. The god fought back, naturally. Geometric patterns of destruction erupted from its crystalline form, reality-warping attacks that should have torn the human ships apart. But the Ascended had learned to see past divine illusions. Where other species perceived unstoppable divine power, humans saw energy patterns that followed predictable rules that could be broken. "Incoming reality distortion," Ryan warned, his consciousness merging with his brother's to process the complex attack patterns. "It's trying to convince space-time that we don't exist." "Cute," Alex replied, activating the ship's probability anchors. Human technology wasn't more advanced than what the gods could do, but it was fundamentally different. While divine power worked by imposing will on reality, human technology worked by exploiting reality's existing rules. Counter-pattern deployed. The gods' attack collapsed as human mathematics proved that yes, the ships did exist. Thank you very much. And here were 17 different ways to prove it. Axiom's scream of frustration shattered 3 of Jupiter's smaller moons. The real work began once the nets had fully constrained the god. Boarding parties launched from each human ship, teenagers and young adults who had consumed enough divine essence to survive in hard vacuum. They moved like underwater dancers, their transformed bodies perfectly adapted for zero-gravity combat. Alex was among the first to reach Axiom's surface. Up close, the god's crystalline skin was warm to the touch and pulsed with internal light. He could feel the entity's consciousness pressing against his mind, trying to establish the worship-dominance relationship that had worked on every other species it had encountered. "Kneel before Axiom," the god's voice whispered directly into his brain. "Offer tribute to the eternal geometric. Serve, and be granted the privilege of prolonged existence." Alex laughed, the sound carrying across vacuum through his modified vocal cords. "Sorry, but we're all full up on gods right now." He drew his monofilament knife, a blade edged with quantum uncertainty that could cut through almost anything, and began carving into the god's hide. Divine flesh was surprisingly tough, but Alex had practiced on smaller deities. The trick was to find the neural pathways, the connections that carried the god's consciousness throughout its massive form. Cut the right connections, and even an immortal entity could be paralyzed. Around him, other Ascended were performing similar operations. Amy Chen, the girl who could manipulate matter at the molecular level, was methodically dissolving sections of crystalline armor. Marcus Brown, who experienced time non-linearly, was cutting into areas where he had foreseen weak points developing. God's struggles grew weaker as more neural pathways were severed. Its reality-warping abilities flickered and died. Its desperate psychic broadcasts faded to whispers. "Please," Axiom finally said, its voice now coming from external speakers rather than direct mental contact. I can grant you technologies beyond your current understanding. Star forges that create matter from pure energy, dimensional gates that span galactic distances, the secret of true immortality. Tommy Wright's ship moved closer to the captured god. Through the bioship's transparent hull, Alex could see his leader floating in a command chamber that pulsed with absorbed divine essence. Tommy's transformation had progressed further than anyone else's. He was nearly 10 feet tall now, his skin glowing with internal starlight, his eyes reflecting depths that seemed to contain entire universes. When Tommy spoke, his voice carried harmonics that made space itself vibrate. What makes you think we want your technology? We've been doing just fine with our own. You cannot hope to match the Dominion's power without divine assistance, Axiom protested. The other gods will hunt you across the galaxy. You need allies. We tried finding allies, Tommy replied. Didn't work out, so we decided to make our own power instead. He gestured, and the boarding parties began their harvest. The process took hours. Divine flesh had to be carefully prepared to avoid poisoning those who consumed it. Neural tissue required special handling to preserve the knowledge and abilities it contained. The god's core consciousness had to be extracted intact to prevent the entity from reconstituting itself. Alex worked alongside his brother, their shared consciousness allowing them to coordinate perfectly. They carved away sections of crystalline neural network, each piece containing fragments of Axiom's memories and power. 3,000 years of consumed civilizations, the knowledge of how to manipulate space-time through pure geometric mathematics, the ability to perceive reality across 17 dimensions simultaneously. All of it would become part of humanity. The feast began as soon as the harvest was complete. Traditional protocol called for the divine flesh to be distributed equally among all ascended, but Axiom was too large and powerful for that approach. Instead, they followed a newer system developed after consuming Nethys. Specialized consumption. Each ascended would consume the parts of the god that best matched their existing abilities. Alex and Ryan shared the portions of neural tissue that governed collective consciousness and hive mind coordination. Amy Chen consumed the matter manipulation centers. Marcus Brown ate the temporal perception organs. The changes were immediate and dramatic. Alex felt his consciousness expanding beyond his physical body, spreading through quantum entanglement to touch every other ascended in the fleet. His brother's thoughts became indistinguishable from his own. The boundaries between individual minds began to blur, but the real revelation came when they consumed Axiom's memory centers. The god had been old beyond measure, created in the early days of the universe when the first intelligent species learned to worship entities beyond their understanding. Through its memories, Alex experienced the birth of the Dominion, the systematic conquest of thousands of species, the careful cultivation of civilizations that would provide the richest feeding. He saw the truth that even the chronicler hadn't known. The Dominion's gods weren't parasites that had infiltrated galactic civilization. They were the original galactic civilization. Every advanced species in the galaxy was descended from creatures that had been enslaved by divine entities billions of years ago. The gods had shaped evolution itself, creating worshippers who would provide the most satisfying feeding experience. Except for humanity. Humanity had evolved on a backwater world, isolated from galactic civilization by random chance and cosmic geography. No gods had guided their development. No divine entities had shaped their evolution or their culture. They were the first truly wild species the gods had encountered in eons. And wild things, Alex realized, didn't make good livestock. Ryan, he said, his voice carrying new harmonics absorbed from Axiom's vocal centers. Are you seeing this? His brother's response came through their shared consciousness, flavored with awe and growing excitement. The genetic patterns. Every species in the Dominion has been modified, engineered for worship, for submission, for optimal feeding, but humans are pure predator. Alex finished. No modifications, no divine tampering, just evolution doing what it does best. Around them, the other ascended were experiencing similar revelations as they consumed different portions of Axiom's essence. Through the fleet's collective consciousness, Alex felt their growing understanding of what they really were. Not failed worshippers trying to appease cosmic entities. Not primitive beings elevated by consuming divine power. They were the first natural predator the gods had ever encountered. The feast continued for days. Each portion of divine essence, absorbed, made the ascended stronger, smarter, more capable of perceiving the true structure of reality. They learned to manipulate matter through geometric equations, to fold space-time like origami, to exist partially in 17 different dimensions simultaneously. But more importantly, they learned where the other gods were hiding. Axiom's memories contained the locations of every divine entity in the galaxy. Gods that had fled to the dark spaces between stars when they learned that humans were hunting them. Ancient entities that had gone dormant to avoid detection. Young gods that had tried to hide among their own worshippers. All of them were now marked for harvest. Tommy Wright called a fleet meeting once the consumption was complete. The Ascended gathered in the bioship's main chamber, their transformed bodies floating in perfect formation. Alex barely recognized his former leader. Tommy had absorbed the largest portion of Axiom's core consciousness and had grown to nearly 15 feet in height. His skin was now translucent crystal, revealing inner structures that pulsed with contained starlight. When he spoke, his voice resonated across multiple dimensions. Phase 1 is complete. We've proven that gods can be hunted and consumed. We've learned the truth about the Dominion's origins and humanity's unique position in galactic evolution. Now we begin Phase 2. A holographic display materialized in the chamber's center, showing a three-dimensional map of the galaxy. Thousands of points of light marked the locations of divine entities, from minor gods hiding in asteroid fields to ancient cosmic entities slumbering at galactic core. We're going to eat them all, Tommy announced. Every god in the galaxy, every divine entity that has ever fed on intelligent life. We're going to consume their power, their knowledge, their very essence. One of the younger Ascended raised a concern. What about the species that worship them? The Dominion races? Tommy's crystalline features shifted into what might have been a smile. They're going to learn what freedom feels like, whether they want to or not. Alex felt a moment of uncertainty. The plan was ambitious beyond measure. There were thousands of gods scattered across the galaxy, some of them ancient beyond human comprehension. Even with their enhanced abilities, could humanity really hunt and consume them all? Then he remembered the terror in Axiom's voice as the god begged for mercy. He remembered the contempt in Vorthak's tone when the alien had dismissed humanity as livestock. He remembered his little sister, killed in the first divine assault on Earth. The uncertainty faded, replaced by hunger. What are our orders? Alex asked. Tommy gestured to the star map, highlighting 17 different regions. We split into hunting packs. Each pack takes a section of the galaxy and works systematically. No god escapes. No divine entity is spared. We feast until there's nothing left to consume. The fleet began dispersing within hours. Ships loaded with ascended hunters, armed with weapons designed to kill immortal beings, powered by engines that ran on liquefied spacetime. They spread across the galaxy like a plague seeking divine flesh. Behind them, they left empty space where gods used to hide. The age of divine dominion was ending. The age of human ascension had begun. And somewhere in the darkness between stars, the few remaining gods began to realize that for the first time in cosmic history, they were the ones being hunted. Alex smiled as his ship jumped to hyperspace, heading for a star system where 3 minor deities were reportedly hiding among the asteroid belts. It was good to be at the top of the food chain. The last god in the galaxy died on a Tuesday. Sarah Chen barely looked up from her homework when the news came through the quantum communication network. Math problems involving 17-dimensional calculus required her full attention, and besides, the harvest had been going on for months. One more dead god was hardly newsworthy anymore. Her little brother Danny, only 8 years old but already showing signs of divine essence integration, bounced excitedly in his chair. Sarah! Sarah! They got Omnath the Eternal. Tommy's pack cornered, Near the galactic core, Sarah sighed and put down her stylus. At 16, she was old enough to remember when the discovery of alien life had been the most important event in human history. Now her baby brother was casually discussing the death of entities that had ruled the galaxy for billions of years. How things changed. That's nice, Danny, she said, though privately she was impressed. Omnath had been one of the oldest gods, a creature of pure thought that existed as living mathematics across multiple star systems. Hunting something like that took serious skill. She activated the wall display to watch the footage. The hunting pack's bioships surrounded a region of space where geometry itself had gone insane. Reality twisted into impossible shapes as Omnath tried to escape into dimensions that shouldn't exist, but the Ascended had learned to hunt in spaces beyond normal physics. Tommy Wright, now calling himself the Prime Hunter, moved through the mathematical chaos like it was his natural element. His body had changed so much that he barely looked human anymore. 20 feet tall, made of crystallized starlight and living equations, he existed partially in 17 dimensions simultaneously. When he struck the final blow, space-time itself seemed to scream. Omnath's death sent shockwaves through the quantum foam. Across the galaxy, the few remaining unchanged humans felt reality hiccup as one of the fundamental forces that had shaped cosmic evolution simply ceased to exist. Awesome. Danny cheered as the hunting pack began harvesting Omnath's remains. Can we watch them eat it? No, Danny. Finish your vegetables first. Sarah turned off the display and returned to her homework. The problems were getting harder as human understanding of reality expanded. Today's lesson covered the mathematics of divine consciousness and how to factor God essence into standard economic equations. Tomorrow they would be studying the practical applications of 17-dimensional space folding. The world had changed a lot in the 3 years since the harvest began. Her parents called her for dinner, their voices carrying harmonics that hadn't existed in human speech before the first divine consumption. Mom had eaten part of a temporal god and could now see probable futures branching out from every decision. Dad had consumed essence from a stellar deity, and his skin glowed softly in the dark. They were among the lucky ones. Most adults couldn't handle divine transformation and had remained unchanged. Sarah's generation, the children who had consumed god flesh during their formative years, had adapted completely. How was school today? Mom asked as they sat down to dinner. The meal included foods that couldn't have existed before humanity learned to manipulate matter at the quantum level. Fruits that grew in 17 dimensions, vegetables that absorbed energy directly from dark matter, meat from creatures that existed as pure mathematics. Mrs. Patterson assigned us a final project, Sarah replied. We have to design a plan for managing the post-divine galaxy. Economics, politics, species integration, the whole thing. Dad nodded approvingly. What's your approach? Sarah had given this a lot of thought. I think we should focus on education. The Dominion species have been worshipping gods for so long they don't know how to think independently. We need to teach them how to be free. And if they don't want to learn? Mom asked, her future sight probably already showing her Sarah's answer. Then they stay in the managed zones until they're ready. We can't force evolution, but we can create the conditions for it. Through the dining room window, Sarah could see one of the managed zones in the distance. Domed cities where former Dominion species lived under human protection while they adjusted to life without gods. The process was going slowly. Most of the alien species had been genetically and psychologically conditioned for worship over millions of years. Learning to think for themselves was like teaching fish to fly. Some adapted quickly. The chronicler's people, already refugees from divine consumption, had integrated into human society within months. Others, like the Crithians who had worshipped Nethys for millennia, were still struggling with basic concepts of individual autonomy. Vorthak, the former high priest who had once dismissed humanity as livestock, now worked as a janitor in New Geneva. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. After dinner, Sarah went up to her room to work on her project. She activated her personal quantum computer and began pulling up data on galactic civilization, population distributions, resource allocations, technological development levels among the various species. The scope of the task was overwhelming. Humanity had gone from a single world species to the dominant force in the galaxy in less than 4 years. They were responsible for the welfare of trillions of beings across hundreds of worlds. The responsibility was staggering, but Sarah's generation had been literally born for it. The divine essence flowing through their veins gave them the intellectual capacity to process problems on a galactic scale. The knowledge absorbed from consumed gods provided understanding of technologies and concepts that would have been incomprehensible to unchanged humans. They were becoming something new. Not human, not God, but something unprecedented in cosmic history. Her homework was interrupted by an emergency alert from the quantum network. Sarah opened the priority channel and found herself face-to-face with Tommy Wright himself. The Prime Hunter looked tired, despite his transformed physiology. Hunting gods across the galaxy for 3 years had taken its toll even on the Ascended. "Citizens of humanity," Tommy began, his voice resonating across 17 dimensions. "Today marks the end of the harvest. The last divine entity in the galaxy has been consumed. After billions of years of rule, the age of gods is over." Sarah felt a strange mixture of triumph and emptiness. The harvest had defined her entire adolescence. What was humanity supposed to do now that there were no more gods to hunt? Tommy seemed to anticipate the question. "The work is not finished. We have consumed the gods, but we have not yet fully integrated their power. We have freed the galaxy from divine rule, but we have not yet taught the liberated species how to thrive in freedom. We have become the apex predators of the cosmos, but we have not yet decided what that means for the future." The broadcast shifted to show images from across the galaxy. Human settlements on worlds that had once housed divine temples. Former Dominion species learning to farm and build and think for themselves. Children born free from genetic conditioning that had trapped their parents in cycles of worship. "The gods called us weak because we had no divine patrons," Tommy continued. "They were wrong. We didn't need gods to protect us. We needed gods to transcend us. And now that transcendence is complete." Sarah looked at herself in her room's mirror. Her reflection showed a 16-year-old girl with eyes that held the depth of 17 dimensions and skin that sometimes flickered with absorbed starlight. She was human, but she was also something more. Something that had never existed before in the history of the universe. The broadcast ended with Tommy's final words echoing across the galaxy. "To any entities listening from beyond our reality, know this. The galaxy is under human protection now. We do not worship. We do not kneel. We do not beg for divine intervention. We are the intervention." Sarah returned to her homework with renewed purpose. Her generation would inherit a galaxy freed from divine rule, but freedom came with responsibility. They would need to guide former worshippers toward independence, manage resources across hundreds of worlds, and defend against any cosmic threats that might emerge from beyond known space. It was a massive undertaking, but Sarah felt ready for it. She had been born in the age of the harvest, raised on the flesh of gods, educated in sciences that treated divinity as just another natural resource to be understood and utilized. She was part of the first generation of apex humans, and the galaxy was their responsibility now. Outside her window, the stars looked different than they had when she was younger. They no longer held mysterious divine entities or ancient cosmic forces beyond human understanding. They were just stars, burning balls of gas and nuclear fusion waiting to be explored by beings who had consumed the gods themselves. Sarah smiled and returned to her math homework. 17-dimensional calculus was challenging, but it was nothing compared to the problems her generation would face as the new rulers of the galaxy. After all, someone had to clean up the mess the gods had left behind, and humanity had always been good at cleaning up.